If you thought you had a bad job, I bet you've never heard of a Chernobyl liquidator. In this video, we're going to be looking at some of the worst jobs in human history. If you missed the first video, be sure you check it out, link in the description. Without further ado, we're kicking it off with the 1950s. Construction workers. Your average construction worker in the 1950s had plenty of ways to die. Apart from the classics like falling off scaffolding or getting crushed by a swinging steel beam, there was something less obvious and slower: asbestos. Back then, asbestos seemed like the thing that could solve literally any problem. It was fireproof, soundproof, pest-proof, mold-proof, heat-proof, decay-proof, corrosion-proof, everything-proof. Proof. So they packed it into literally everything: homes, schools, ships, factories, ironing boards, even toasters. And for those of you who are truly health conscious, it even made its way into cigarette filters. As if those weren't bad enough. Construction workers like carpenters and plumbers handled asbestos every day. They sawed it, drilled it, mixed it, and nailed it into walls without any masks. By the end of a shift, they were covered in white dust from head to toe. They'd brush it off, head home, and then hug their families. No one thought twice about it. It was just dust. But over time, asbestos fibers caused all sorts of nasty ailments: asbestosis, mesothelioma, and lung cancer. These diseases can take decades to appear, which made it easy for companies to ignore the problem. See, whispers about asbestos dangers had been around since the 1930s, but it wasn't until the 1960s that medical evidence became undeniable. Then it took another decade for regulators to finally step in. In 1973, the EPA banned spray-applied asbestos for fireproofing and insulation, but by then, the damage was already done. Experts estimate that asbestos exposure caused around 255,000 deaths annually. Yes, causes, as in, it's still going on. And those same buildings from the 1950s, the ones lined with asbestos for safety, they're still standing. They're still in use, still quietly shedding fibers anytime a wall gets drilled or a ceiling tile breaks. And moving on to our next decade, for the worst job in the 1960s comes leather tannery workers. If you walked past a leather tannery in the 1960s, you'd smell it before you saw it. Rotting flesh, ammonia, and industrial chemicals strong enough to make your eyes water from half a block away. Tanneries turned raw animal hides into finished leather, the kind used in shoes, handbags, car seats, and similar luxury products. But the processing part looked more like medieval alchemy. Workers soaked hides in lime to strip off hair, rinsed them in acid, and then dunked them in the corium baths until they came out soft and shiny. All by hand and all day. They were using chromium salts, sulfuric acid, formaldehyde, and ammonia. Gloves and masks? No, that wasn't a part of that cocktail. In the long term, the job came with a souvenir list of illnesses: ulcers, breathing problems, liver and kidney damage, and an unusually high rate of bladder and lung cancers. And it wasn't just the chemicals. The hides themselves carried bacteria, parasites, and even anthrax spores. A single nick or cut could turn septic in days. Even the work itself was brutal. Hauling heavy wet hides, turning giant drums, and standing in ankle-deep muck for 12 hours straight, but at least it paid something, and that was often better than nothing. In 1970, the US passed the Occupational Safety and Health Act, at least on paper. In reality, many of the most dangerous operations simply packed up and moved to India, Bangladesh, and other developing countries where regulations were still decades away. Let's move on to the 1970s with oil rig workers. In the 1970s, oil was money. It was power, and it was also national pride. After the 1973 oil crisis, everyone was drilling holes in the ocean like they'd lost something down there. Oil rigs spouted offshore like rusted metal mushrooms. Most of the guys working on these rigs were young, working-class men chasing high pay and a little adventure. Well, they technically got both. The pay was good, 2 or 3 times what a factory job got you. That's how you ended up living for weeks on a metal island 120 miles from land, surrounded by cold black water while 30-meter waves smashed the steel legs of the rig that you floated on. 12-hour shifts, everything shaking, unbearably loud. The pay's great, but everything else was pretty bad, and the only entertainment was seeing who could almost die the most impressively that week, which, as it turns out, wasn't really that difficult. Hydrogen sulfide gas could knock you out cold before you could even smell it. A snapped cable could cut a man in half. Crushed hands, snapped spines, and electrocutions from wet cables and open wiring. Slippery decks, moving cranes, heavy machinery, but that wasn't even the worst of it. The real nightmare were the blowouts. Hit the wrong gas pocket, and pressure sent oil and mud rocketing out of your well like a geyser. And if that gas caught fire, the whole rig became a floating fireball. Add in gale force winds, freezing rain, sudden storms, and helicopter rides that crashed often enough to keep you religious. Some of these workers never made it home, and some rigs didn't either. But you didn't complain, even when your hand was half crushed. And if someone did get hurt, the foreman just yelled, "Tape it up!" and everybody just went back to yelling at someone else. You didn't talk about fear. You laughed it off, bragged about close calls, called it man's work. The rigs kept growing, the oil kept flowing, and near misses kept piling up. Alright guys, if you aren't thoroughly depressed enough, we have 2 more decades coming up, but in the meantime, if you are enjoying the video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe, and leave a comment down below. What do you think is the worst job today? If we get enough comments, we might just make a video about it. Thank you for paying attention. Moving on to the 1980s, the Chernobyl Liquidators. In the 1980s, the Soviet Union was falling apart, and nothing summed that up better than Chernobyl. One April night in 1986, a routine safety test at Reactor 4 went so horribly wrong that it basically blew the roof completely off. The Soviets said it was just a minor fire, but meanwhile, radiation levels were clocking over 30,000 roentgens an hour, and somebody had to clean it all up. That someone ended up being around 600,000 Chernobyl liquidators. Firefighters sprayed water onto what they thought was a normal blaze. However, it was anything but that. They stood on glowing graphite from the exposed reactor core, and within hours, they were vomiting, blistering, and collapsing. Helicopter pilots flew through the radioactive cloud to drop sand and boron into the crater. Bulldozer operators scraped radioactive soil and buried whole forests. Miners dug tunnels under the reactor in 50 Celsius heat, half naked because it was too hot to wear protective gear. Men were sent to shove chunks of radioactive debris from the roof back into the open reactor. Each had about 90 seconds to work before getting pulled out. Many would spend the rest of their lives paying for those minutes on the roof. Cancers, heart disease, cataracts, collapsed immune systems, and the acute radiation sickness wasn't fun either. It started with vomiting and dizziness, and then became red skin, then open sores and bleeding as their very DNA was slowly disintegrating. Internal organs failed one by one. And the thing is, no one really knows how many were actually affected by radiation at the time. Soviet records? They were rather positive, but estimates run into the tens or even hundreds of thousands. The liquidators had saved Europe from annihilation, not with machines, but with their own flesh, bone, and impossible courage. Though I'm sure that they weren't told the full truth about what would happen to them down there. Moving on to our spot for the worst job in the 1990s. E-waste dismantlers. By the 1990s, humanity had officially entered the digital age. Computers, cell phones, camcorders. The future was sleek, wireless, and full of beeping noises. And just like every other shiny new invention, someone somewhere had to deal with the garbage it left behind. When Western countries started upgrading their tech every few years, they also started shipping their recycled electronics overseas. So container ships full of broken monitors, dead batteries, and cracked circuit boards headed straight for places like Guiyu in China, Agbogbloshi in Ghana, Lagos in Nigeria, or Delhi in India. And if you're wondering, what about the Basel Convention? If you know about the Basel Convention, the Basel Convention is an international treaty that regulates the transboundary movements and disposal of hazardous waste to protect human health and the environment. True, the Basel Convention had already banned exporting hazardous waste to developing countries back in 1989, but with enough paperwork and a wink, hazardous became recyclable, and the ships kept coming. Out of sight, out of mind. But for the workers there, it was very much in sight, and in lungs, and in food and in water, and probably in blood too. Whole families spent their days dismantling e-waste. This meant cracking open old computers with hammers, burning wires over open fires to melt off the plastic, and soaking circuit boards in acid baths to get the precious metals inside. And of course, they did all of this without any protective gear. So the air they inhaled was heavy with lead, mercury, cadmium, and the sweet smell of burning plastic. People developed chronic coughs, nerve damage, skin lesions, and miscarriages became common. Tests in Guiyu found the levels of lead in children's blood were 3 times higher than safe limits, and soil was so contaminated that it could be classified as industrial waste. Still, for tens of thousands, it was the only job around. I'd love to close this segment by saying that this kind of thing doesn't happen anymore.
But it does.
So yeah, while I'm 100% positive that the worst job you've ever had doesn't compare to these, it's still not a good enough reason to stay stuck. Be sure to download Kickresume now. With the power of AI, we can help you rebuild your resume in seconds. Alright guys, thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time on Kickresume.